Marcus Chen stepped off the transport shuttle onto the crystalline platform of Nexus Prime Academy, his worn military boots making a dull thud against the gleaming surface. Around him, dozens of alien cadets moved with careful, measured steps, their movements betraying centuries of evolutionary caution. Marcus walked normally, his casual stride already drawing stares from the assembled crowd of Interstellar Academy hopefuls. The recruiting officer, a tall Vorthan with iridescent blue skin, consulted his holographic tablet with obvious confusion. "Cadet Chen from Earth." The officer's voice carried the universal translator's mechanical undertone, but Marcus could hear the uncertainty beneath it. "I'm afraid there must be some mistake. Earth isn't listed among our approved Academy worlds." Marcus pulled out a crumpled data pad, its surface scratched from countless drops and impacts that would have shattered any normal device. "No mistake, sir. Special admission from the Galactic Defense Council. They wanted a representative from every member world." He handed over the authorization codes, which pulsed with high-level clearance signatures. The Vorthan's large eyes widened as he processed the information. Around them, other cadets began to gather, their curiosity overcoming their instinctive caution. Marcus noticed how they kept their distance, forming a loose circle at least 3 meters away from him. He'd seen this before during his brief stint on the orbital stations. Everyone in the galaxy seemed to have an unconscious understanding of safe distances, personal space, and threat assessment. Everyone except humans. "Welcome to Nexus Prime Academy," the officer finally managed, though his voice carried a note of barely concealed concern. "I am Instructor Kelvak. Your quarters are in Block 7, Level 12. I trust you can find your way." "Sure thing," Marcus replied, slinging his duffel bag over his shoulder with casual ease. The bag, packed with standard Earth gear, weighed roughly 40 kilograms. He lifted it like it was filled with feathers. Several alien cadets took an involuntary step backward. As Marcus walked toward the Academy complex, he couldn't help but notice the architecture. Everything was built with smooth, rounded edges, no sharp corners anywhere. The walkways were wide enough for 6 beings to walk abreast, with emergency alcoves every 10 meters. Even the decorative plants were behind protective barriers, their movements monitored by discrete sensor arrays. A small group of cadets followed at a respectful distance, their whispered conversations barely audible. Marcus caught fragments through his enhanced hearing, another human trait that seemed to unnerve the galactic community. "Is that really from Earth?" whispered a feathered being that resembled a cross between a hawk and a diplomat. "The Deathworld," responded another voice, this one belonging to a crystalline entity whose form chimed softly as it moved. "I thought those were just stories." "My instructor said Deathworlders were quarantined for good reason," added a third voice, coming from something that looked like an upright jellyfish in an environmental suit. Marcus pretended not to hear them, but he couldn't suppress a slight smile. The reputation of Earth and its inhabitants had spread far beyond what most humans realized. What his people considered normal, the rest of the galaxy viewed as terrifyingly exceptional. The Academy complex sprawled across several floating islands connected by energy bridges. As Marcus crossed the first bridge, he noticed the subtle vibration in the structure, a low-frequency oscillation designed to detect the presence and weight of anyone crossing. Safety protocols, no doubt. The bridge was rated for beings up to 5 times normal galactic standard mass, which meant it could easily handle anything short of a full-sized Krobian battle mech. Marcus weighed in at roughly twice galactic standard. Pure muscle and bone density evolved from a world where everything was trying to kill everything else. He'd been average height for a human at 1.8 meters, but here he towered over most of the alien cadets, who seemed to favor smaller, more energy-efficient body plans. His quarters in Block 7 turned out to be spacious by human standards, though he suspected they were considered cramped by galactic norms. The walls were padded with some kind of impact-resistant foam, and the furniture was bolted down. Even the mirror was made of some unbreakable polymer rather than glass. Marcus set his bag down and began unpacking, noting that someone had thoughtfully provided him with furniture rated for high-gravity species. A chime at his door announced a visitor. Marcus opened it to find a nervous-looking administrative android, its chrome surface polished to mirror brightness. "Cadet Chen, I am Academic Coordinator, Unit 7742. I have been assigned to help you integrate into Academy life." "Thanks," Marcus said, gesturing for the android to enter. "Though I'm not sure what kind of special accommodation I'm going to need." Unit 77, 42's optical sensors whirred as they focused on Marcus. Actually, sir, there are quite a few protocols we need to discuss. First, all practical exercises involving weapons, vehicles, or potentially dangerous equipment will require additional safety supervisors when you participate. Marcus raised an eyebrow. Why's that? Earthborn individuals have a documented tendency to treat dangerous situations as routine challenges rather than genuine threats, the android explained with mechanical precision. This leads to what other cadets might perceive as reckless behavior, potentially causing panic or inappropriate risk-taking among your classmates. So you're saying I need a babysitter? A safety observer, Unit 7742 corrected diplomatically. Additionally, your physical training will need to be modified. Standard Academy PT is designed for beings from worlds with gravity ranging from 0.3 to 1.2 standard. Earth gravity is 1.8 standard, and your muscle density and bone structure reflect that adaptation. Marcus nodded, beginning to understand the scope of the problem. He'd grown up on a world where the baseline threat level would be considered a catastrophic emergency by galactic standards. Every human learned to fight, to survive, to adapt, because Earth didn't offer its children any other choice. What felt like basic competence to him would appear superhuman to beings from more civilized worlds. There's also the matter of your psychological profile, Unit 7742 continued. Deathworld survivors exhibit significantly elevated stress tolerances, rapid threat assessment capabilities, and what galactic standard psychology terms adaptive aggression responses. This means you may react to situations in ways that could be startling to your fellow cadets. I'm not going to hurt anyone, Marcus said firmly. Of course not, sir. However, your definition of non-harmful may differ significantly from galactic norms. For example, what you might consider a friendly competitive spar could be perceived as a life-threatening assault by someone from a low-gravity garden world. Marcus sat down on his reinforced bed, which creaked ominously under his weight despite being rated for species 3 times his mass. So, what you're telling me is that I'm basically a walking weapon as far as everyone else is concerned. Not a weapon, sir, more like a natural disaster with good intentions. Despite everything, Marcus found himself laughing. The sound was apparently louder than he'd intended, because Unit 7742's sensors immediately began scanning for potential threats, and he could hear movement in the corridors outside as other cadets responded to what they probably perceived as some kind of aggressive vocalization. I'm going to need to learn a lot more than just tactics and strategy here, aren't I? Marcus asked. Indeed, sir. Your greatest challenge at Nexus Prime Academy will not be mastering the curriculum. Our projections suggest you will find the academic material relatively simple. Your challenge will be learning to exist in a civilized society without accidentally terrifying everyone around you. Unit 7742 paused, its processors apparently working through some complex calculation. If I may ask, sir, what made you want to attend the academy? Most Deathworlders who achieve space travel tend to prefer careers in private security or resource extraction. Academic military service is highly unusual for your species. Marcus looked out his window at the floating spires of the academy, where hundreds of young beings from across the galaxy were beginning their journey toward becoming protectors of interstellar peace. Back home, we have a saying, to protect and serve. I guess I figured that shouldn't stop at my planet's atmosphere. The android's optical sensors dimmed slightly, what Marcus was learning to recognize as a sign of deep processing. That is remarkably idealistic for a Deathworlder, sir. Maybe that's why they let me in. Unit 7742 began outlining the next day's schedule, orientation, academic assessments, and his first group exercise. Marcus listened with half his attention while watching the alien cadets through his window. They moved in small groups, always maintaining careful distances from each other, their body language speaking of millennia of evolutionary caution. Tomorrow, he would begin learning how to be a soldier in a galaxy where his very existence challenged every assumption about what that meant. The irony wasn't lost on him. The academy was designed to train the best and brightest to protect galactic civilization from threats. But what happened when the threat was simply being too good at what you were trained to do? As Unit 7742 finished its briefing and left, Marcus began his evening routine. Push-ups, sit-ups, and basic calisthenics that would have been impressive by galactic standards if anyone had been watching. He kept the volume low, mindful of his neighbors who were probably trying to sleep. Even his consideration for others had to be carefully managed here. Outside his window, the academy settled into its nighttime rhythm. Security drones made their rounds, their sensors sweeping for any signs of disturbance. Emergency response teams stood ready to deal with any crisis that might arise from housing hundreds of young beings from dozens of different species in one location. Marcus suspected that before long, those same security protocols would need significant updates. Not because he intended to cause trouble, but because the definition of trouble itself was about to expand in ways the Academy had never imagined. He settled into his reinforced bed, which groaned softly but held, and began planning for tomorrow. Somewhere in the Academy's vast database, his psychological profile was probably already triggering automated alerts. Somewhere else, administrators were updating risk assessments and safety protocols. And somewhere, other cadets were lying awake wondering what it would be like to train alongside someone from a world where survival was not guaranteed. Adaptation was mandatory, and weakness was fatal. Marcus fell asleep easily, his body and mind automatically entering the efficient rest state that Earth had taught all its children. Outside, the Academy's night shift security recorded no disturbances, no unusual activities, no threats to the peaceful academic environment. They had no sensors capable of detecting potential. The morning alarm at Nexus Prime Academy was designed to gently wake beings from a dozen different species, each with their own sleep cycles and sensory preferences. For Marcus, who had grown up with Earth's chaotic day-night patterns and the constant background noise of a world where silence meant danger, the soft harmonic chimes were almost inaudible. He was already dressed and ready when Unit 7742 arrived to escort him to orientation. The android's sensors immediately began their morning threat assessment, a routine that Marcus was beginning to understand happened every time he encountered Academy staff. "Sleep well, sir?" Unit 7742 inquired as they walked through corridors that seemed wider and more spacious than they had the previous day. "Fine, thanks, though I think your environmental controls might be a little off. It was pretty cold last night." Unit 7742's optical sensors flickered. "Sir, the temperature in your quarters was maintained at 22 degrees Celsius, which is optimal for most carbon-based life forms." Marcus shrugged. "Like I said, a little cold, not a big deal." The android made a note on its internal systems, another data point in the growing file labeled Deathworlder Environmental Adaptations. The Academy's Xenobiology department was going to have a field day with Marcus's presence. Orientation took place in the Grand Assembly Hall, a vast space designed to accommodate beings of wildly different sizes and environmental needs. Marcus found himself assigned to a section with other, physically robust species, a polite way of separating anyone who might accidentally cause injury during normal interaction. His immediate neighbors included a Crobian warrior scholar whose exoskeleton gleamed like polished obsidian, and a vegan tree shepherd whose bark-like skin was covered in patches of symbiotic moss. Both were considered dangerous by galactic standards, though Marcus privately thought they seemed quite pleasant. "You are the Deathworlder?" the Crobian asked, its translation device rendering the clicking sounds of its natural speech into standard galactic. "I am Battle Scholar Thector. I have heard stories of your species." "Marcus Chen," he replied, offering his hand in the human gesture of greeting. Thector stared at the extended appendage for several seconds before carefully extending one of its secondary manipulator arms. The brief contact seemed to surprise the Crobian, whose sensor organs immediately began a detailed scan of Marcus's biological signatures. "Fascinating," Thector murmured. "Your muscle density is extraordinary, yet you show no signs of enhancement technology. This is natural adaptation." "Born this way," Marcus confirmed. "What about you? That exoskeleton looks pretty formidable." "Crobians are considered a warrior species by galactic classification," Thector explained with what Marcus was learning to recognize as carefully controlled pride. "We evolved on a world of constant territorial conflicts. However, our aggression is highly ritualized, bound by honor codes developed over millions of years. We fight with purpose, never without meaning." Marcus nodded, understanding the implication. Humans fought for survival. When purpose and meaning were luxuries they couldn't afford, they fought anyway. The tree shepherd, who introduced itself as root singer Velter, swayed gently as it spoke. My people are pacifist by nature, but our world taught us to be persistent. We can survive damage that would destroy most organic beings, and we heal from almost any injury given sufficient time and resources. So we're the Academy's collection of species that won't break easily, Marcus observed. An astute observation, Thector agreed, though I suspect you may be in a category entirely your own. Before Marcus could respond, the orientation began. Dean Administrator Kesshai, a distinguished Altarian with ceremonial crystalline implants marking her academic rank, floated to the center of the hall. Her voice, amplified by the Academy's systems, carried to every corner of the vast space. Cadets of the 847th Academy class, welcome to Nexus Prime. You represent 127 worlds and 89 distinct species, brought together by a common purpose, the defense and preservation of galactic civilization. Marcus listened as she outlined the Academy's history, its mission, and its expectations. Standard military academy rhetoric, translated into language suitable for a dozen different cultural contexts. What caught his attention was the underlying assumption that ran through everything she said. Civilization was something precious and fragile, constantly threatened by forces of chaos and destruction. On Earth, chaos and destruction were Tuesday. Civilization was what humans built anyway. Your first exercise will be a survival assessment in our controlled wilderness preserve, Dean Kesshai announced. You will be divided into mixed species teams and tasked with surviving for 72 hours in an environment designed to test your adaptability, resourcefulness, and ability to work with others, despite fundamental biological and cultural differences. Marcus felt a stir of interest. Survival exercises were something he could relate to. Around him, other cadets began showing signs of nervous anticipation, elevated respiratory rates, increased electromagnetic emissions, and other species-specific stress responses that the Academy's sensors were undoubtedly monitoring. Team assignments are based on compatibility algorithms designed to maximize both challenge and learning opportunities, the Dean continued. Remember, the preserve contains automated monitoring systems to ensure safety, but they are programmed to intervene only in case of genuine life-threatening emergencies. Unit 7742 appeared at Marcus's shoulder, its mechanical voice barely audible above the Dean's announcement. Sir, you have been assigned to Team Delta 7. Your teammates have been specially selected. Let me guess, Marcus said quietly, species that won't panic at the first sign of trouble. Among other considerations, yes, sir. As the orientation concluded and cadets began moving toward their assigned team meeting areas, Marcus noticed the subtle choreography of galactic social interaction. Beings instinctively maintained appropriate distances based on threat assessments that had been refined over evolutionary timescales. Predator species gave prey species extra space. Heavily armored or naturally weaponized species moved slowly and deliberately to signal peaceful intent. Marcus moved naturally, his casual human gait apparently registering as predatory confidence to the sensitive threat detection systems that every spacefaring species had developed. Conversations quieted as he passed. Groups unconsciously shifted to give him more room. Team Delta 7's meeting area was in a smaller chamber designed for privacy. Marcus arrived to find his teammates already assembled. Thector the Crobian, whom he'd met earlier, a Sethari information specialist whose cybernetic implants glowed softly beneath translucent skin, and a young Terran Colonial Federation cadet who looked surprisingly human until you noticed the gill slits and the way his eyes reflected light like a cat's. Jake Morrison, the Colonial introduced himself, offering a firm handshake that Marcus recognized as genuinely Earth-style. Titan Colony Outer System, my grandparents were from Earth before the migration. Marcus Chen, Earth proper. Nice to meet someone who knows how to shake hands. The Sethari, whose name translated roughly as information flows like water, but preferred the shortened version, flow, studied them both with obvious fascination. I have analyzed 12 different theoretical approaches to first contact greetings, but none of my research covered interspecies variations. Humans spread out pretty far, pretty fast, Jake explained. Titan's a high-gravity ice moon with a methane atmosphere and subsurface oceans that want to kill you. It's not quite Earth-level hostile, but it teaches you to pay attention. Thector's sensor organs flicked between the two humans, clearly detecting similarities and differences in their biological signatures. Are all human worlds equally challenging? Marcus and Jake exchanged glances. Not all, Marcus said diplomatically. But humans tend to end up on the planets that other species consider unlivable. It's kind of our niche. Their team briefing was conducted by Senior Instructor Malik, a veteran hegemony officer whose species resembled an elegant cross between a spider and a diplomat. Team Delta 7, you have been selected because your species profiles suggest high survival capability and low panic response. However, this does not mean the exercise will be simple. Malik activated a holographic display showing their designated survival area, a section of the Academy's preserve that included varied terrain, weather systems, and indigenous wildlife. The preserve contains environments from 17 different worlds, all adapted to present realistic survival challenges without actual lethal danger. Marcus studied the topographical data while listening to the briefing. Dense forests, open plains, rocky highlands, and what appeared to be a swamp system connected by a river network. Standard wilderness survival territory, though he suspected the indigenous wildlife would be more exotic than anything found on Earth. Your objectives are threefold, Malik continued. First, survive for 72 hours without outside assistance. Second, reach the extraction point designated in your mission packet. Third, work effectively as a team despite your species' differences. Flo raised a manipulator arm. Are there specific restrictions on the methods we may use to achieve these objectives? Only those imposed by physics and basic moral principles, Malik replied. Unnecessary harm to preserve wildlife will result in point deductions, but otherwise you are free to use whatever approaches seem appropriate. Marcus almost smiled. He was beginning to understand why he'd been placed on this particular team. The Academy wanted to see what happened when you gave a group of naturally dangerous beings a survival challenge and then basically told them to figure it out. The equipment provided to each team was minimal, basic emergency rations for 3 days, a single water purification unit, emergency beacon for true emergencies, and standard Academy uniforms that provided moderate protection against weather and minor injuries. No weapons, no advanced technology, no safety nets beyond the preserve's automated monitoring. One final note, Malik added as the teams prepared to deploy. The preserve's ecosystems are designed to be challenging, but not overwhelming for any member species of the galactic community. However, interaction effects between different species' approaches to survival have not been extensively tested. Exercise appropriate caution. Marcus suspected that last comment was directed specifically at his team. The transport to their insertion point was a standard Academy shuttle, its passenger compartment configured for mixed species. As they flew over the preserve, Marcus got his first good look at their operational environment. The artificial wilderness below was impressively realistic. If he hadn't known better, he would have taken it for a natural planetary ecosystem. Impressive terraforming, Jake observed, pressing against one of the windows. Whoever designed this really knew what they were doing. The preserve was created using environmental data from over 200 different worlds, Flo provided, accessing the information through his cybernetic implants. It represents approximately 15,000 years of accumulated xenobiology research. Thector's sensor organs track the landscape passing below. I detect several ecosystem signatures that register as threatening to Crobian biochemistry. This should be educational. The shuttle set them down in a clearing at the edge of the forest zone, its engines creating a brief whirlwind that sent local wildlife scurrying for cover. As the craft departed, leaving them alone in the wilderness, Marcus felt something he hadn't experienced since leaving Earth, the simple pleasure of being somewhere that might actually challenge him. So, Jake said, shouldering his pack and looking around at their surroundings, anyone want to volunteer to be team leader? Marcus was about to respond when something large crashed through the underbrush at the edge of their clearing. The creature that emerged was clearly one of the preserve's indigenous species, roughly the size of an earth bear, but with 6 legs, natural armor plating, and what appeared to be electromagnetic discharge organs along its spine. Flo immediately began backing away while accessing threat assessment databases. Thector shifted into a defensive posture, honor-bound not to retreat but clearly recognizing a significant threat. Jake dropped into a combat crouch that would have been familiar to any human, but probably looked suicidal to outside observers. Marcus stepped forward. The creature's electromagnetic organs began charging with a sound like building thunder. Its 6 legs spread wide in an obvious threat display, and its armored head lowered to present its most dangerous weapons forward. Marcus looked it in the eyes and said, "Hey there, big guy, we're not here to cause trouble." For a moment that stretched into eternity, human and alien predator evaluated each other. The creature's electromagnetic discharge faded. Its aggressive posture slowly relaxed. After several seconds, it made a sound that might have been curiosity, turned around, and wandered back into the forest. Marcus's teammates stared at him in various states of shock. What Flo finally managed just happened. Marcus shrugged. Apex predator recognition, it's universal. The next 48 hours redefined everything Team Delta 7 thought they knew about survival training. What began as a standard academy exercise evolved into something that would be analyzed by xenobiology departments across the galaxy for decades to come. Marcus had unconsciously taken point as they moved through the preserve's varied ecosystems, and the effect of his presence on the artificial wilderness was unprecedented. Creatures that the Academy's designers had programmed to be moderately aggressive territorial challenges took one look at the human and decided they had urgent business elsewhere. "This is not normal behavior," Flo reported on the second day, consulting his cybernetic access to the preserve's ecological databases. "The Caltheran hunting pack that just avoided us should have been programmed to test our group coordination under pressure. Instead, they exhibited what the system classifies as extreme subordination response." They had made camp in a sheltered grove near a freshwater stream, their progress toward the extraction point far ahead of Academy projections. Jake was using his colonial survival skills to construct improved shelter from local materials, while Thector had successfully negotiated trade agreements with a tribe of sapient arboreal creatures for additional food supplies. Marcus himself had contributed by simply walking around their perimeter, which apparently served as an incredibly effective security system. Even the preserve's plant life seemed to respond to his presence. Aggressive thorn vines retracted when he approached, and territorial flowering bushes that were supposed to release mild toxins when threatened instead offered up their nectar stores. "It's like the entire ecosystem recognizes him as something that shouldn't be challenged," Jake observed, watching Marcus casually wade across a stream that was supposed to contain aggressive amphibious predators. The creatures had taken one look at him and buried themselves in the mud. Thector's honor-based worldview was struggling to process what he was witnessing. Among Crobians, dominance displays must be backed by demonstrated capability, but the human has shown no aggression, made no threats, engaged in no dominance behaviors at all. How do these creatures recognize his status? "Maybe it's not about status," Flo suggested, his cybernetic implants processing multiple hypotheses simultaneously. "Perhaps it's about recognition of environmental adaptation. Earth is classified as a Class 12 Deathworld by galactic standards. The preservation systems here only simulate environments up to Class 6. Marcus returned from his reconnaissance of their next day's route, apparently unaware of the ongoing analysis of his ecological impact. "Good news, clear path to the extraction point, and I found a shortcut through the highlands that should save us about 6 hours. Bad news, there's a storm system moving in from the west that looks pretty serious." Jake looked up at the clear evening sky. "How serious are we talking?" "Class 3 atmospheric disturbance," Marcus replied, reading the signs with unconscious expertise. "Lightning, high winds, probably some hail. We'll want to find better shelter than this by tomorrow night." His teammates exchanged glances. The Academy's weather prediction systems had forecast mild precipitation with light winds. Marcus was predicting what sounded like a major storm based on nothing more than looking at clouds and feeling the air. "Sir," Flo said carefully, "are you certain of your meteorological assessment? My access to Academy weather systems indicates—" "Your systems are wrong," Marcus interrupted, not rudely but with the calm certainty of someone who had learned to read weather patterns as a matter of survival. "Trust me on this one. We need to be somewhere solid when that storm hits." 12 hours later, As they huddled in a cave system that Marcus had located with seemingly impossible accuracy, the storm raged outside with exactly the intensity he had predicted. Academy emergency protocols, activated as what the weather systems had classified as light rain, developed into the worst atmospheric disturbance the preserve had experienced in over a century. "How did you know?" Thector asked, his voice carrying a note of something approaching awe. Marcus shrugged, a gesture that his teammates were learning indicated both humility and the casual competence that marked everything he did. "Earth weather doesn't ask permission before it tries to kill you. You learn to pay attention." The storm lasted 6 hours, during which time the preserve's monitoring systems recorded electromagnetic activity, pressure variations, and precipitation levels that exceeded their safety parameters. Emergency response teams prepared for multiple casualty scenarios as other Academy teams struggled with conditions they were never meant to face. Team Delta 7 rode out the storm in perfect safety, playing impromptu word games and sharing stories of their respective home worlds. Marcus learned that Jake's colonial upbringing had been almost as challenging as life on Earth proper. Titan's environment was essentially a frozen hell that required constant vigilance to survive. Flo's cybernetic enhancements had been necessary adaptations to his species' high-radiation homeworld, and Thector's warrior culture had developed from millions of years of evolution on a planet where honor and survival were inseparably linked. When the storm passed and they emerged from their shelter, they found a transformed landscape. The preserve's careful ecological balance had been disrupted by the unexpected severity of the weather. Flooded areas, fallen trees, and displaced wildlife created new challenges that the Academy's original survival scenario had never anticipated. "This is now a genuine survival situation," Flo observed, his sensors detecting distress signals from other teams across the preserve. "Academy emergency protocols are activating." Marcus surveyed the changed environment with the same calm assessment he had shown throughout the exercise. "We can reach the extraction point in about 4 hours if we go direct, or we can take longer routes and check on the other teams." It wasn't really a question, and everyone knew it. Over the next 12 hours, Team Delta 7 became an unofficial rescue operation. Using Marcus's uncanny ability to navigate the transformed terrain and his strange effect on the preserve's wildlife, they located and assisted 3 other teams that had been caught in dangerous situations by the storm. The first team they found had been trapped by rising flood waters, their designated shelter area now completely submerged. Marcus simply walked into the turbulent water, which should have been dangerous even for someone with his capabilities, and emerged with the location of safe high ground that somehow none of the Academy's mapping systems had identified. The second team had taken shelter in what they thought was a secure cave, only to discover they were sharing it with a family of creatures that resembled 6-meter-long metallic serpents. The creatures were non-aggressive but territorial, and the standoff had lasted for hours with no resolution in sight. Marcus approached the largest of the serpents, made a series of what sounded like random vocalizations, and somehow convinced them to relocate to a different section of the cave system. "Did you just talk to them?" asked Cadet Silarek, a nervous Centauri whose team had been rescued from the serpent situation. "Not exactly," Marcus replied. "More like mutual professional courtesy." The third rescue was the most dramatic. A team of cadets from Garden Worlds had been caught in the open during the storm and taken shelter in what they thought was a dormant thermal vent. The vent had reactivated due to pressure changes caused by the storm, creating a situation where the cadets were trapped between scalding steam and the dangerous wildlife that had been driven from their normal habitats by the weather. Marcus surveyed the situation for exactly 30 seconds, then walked directly into what should have been a lethal environment. The superheated steam parted around him like he was surrounded by some kind of protective field. The displaced predators took one look at him and decided they had urgent business in the completely opposite direction. He emerged from the chaos carrying 2 injured cadets, his academy uniform singed, but his confidence unshaken. "Medical attention needed here," he called to Flo, who had been monitoring the rescue with his cybernetic sensors. "Nothing life-threatening, but they're going to need treatment for heat exposure and minor lacerations." By the time official Academy rescue teams reached the preserve, Team Delta 7 had accounted for the safety of 43 cadets from 11 different teams. They had also discovered 6 new species of preserved wildlife that had never been documented, located 3 previously unknown freshwater sources, and identified what appeared to be an ancient installation of unknown origin buried beneath the highland section. Marcus delivered his after-action report with the same casual competence that characterized everything he did. Exercise objectives completed. Team cohesion maintained throughout extended operations. No significant injuries sustained. Recommend minor modifications to preserve safety protocols to account for Class 3+ weather events. Dean Administrator Keshai reviewed the sensor logs with growing amazement. Cadet Chen, our monitoring systems recorded 247 separate encounters between your team and preserve wildlife. In 246 of those encounters, potentially aggressive species chose to withdraw rather than engage. How do you account for this? Marcus considered the question seriously. I think they recognized that we weren't there to compete with them. We had our own objectives, our own territory to cross, our own challenges to deal with. No point in fighting when you don't have to. And the 247th encounter. Oh, that was the serpent family. They were just curious about Jake's colonial accent. Once they figured out he wasn't from their original territorial range, they were fine with sharing space. The debrief sessions that followed would reshape Academy training protocols for decades. Marcus's presence had turned a routine survival exercise into a demonstration of capabilities that galactic civilization had never seen before. Not because humans were uniquely violent or aggressive, but because they had learned to exist in environments where survival itself was a daily negotiation with forces that could kill without malice or intent. The real question, Instructor Malek said during the final assessment review, is whether these results are typical for your species, or whether you represent an exceptional individual even by Earth standards. Marcus thought about his hometown, where navigating rush-hour traffic required the same threat assessment skills he'd used in the preserve. He thought about his high school, where normal socialization included activities that would register as combat training by galactic standards. He thought about his family, who had sent him to the academy with casual confidence that he would represent Earth well among the stars. "I'm pretty average," he said finally. "Maybe a little better educated than some, but Earth doesn't really produce people who can't handle basic survival challenges. It's not optional where I come from." Senior Instructor Malek made extensive notes in his official report. In the margins, barely visible, he added a personal observation that would eventually become one of the most quoted lines in galactic military sociology. "If this is what humans consider average, perhaps we should reconsider our assumptions about the limitations of organic intelligence." 3 weeks later, Marcus received his first official commendation from the Academy Board, recognizing his exceptional performance in crisis leadership and interspecies cooperation. He also received an unofficial visit from Admiral Keshai herself, who had questions that weren't going to appear in any official reports. "Cadet Chen," she said, settling into the reinforced chair that had been installed in his quarters after the standard furniture had proven inadequate. "I've been studying the sensor data from your wilderness exercise. Are you aware that your biological signatures registered as consistent with what our systems classify as a Class A apex predator?" "No, ma'am, I wasn't aware of that." "The interesting thing is that you showed no aggressive behavior, made no threatening gestures, and actively avoided confrontations. Yet the preserve's wildlife responded to you as if you were the most dangerous thing they had ever encountered. How do you explain that?" Marcus considered the question carefully. On Earth, the most dangerous predators are often the ones that don't need to prove anything. They're secure enough in their capabilities that they can afford to be selective about when and where they use them. Admiral Keshai's expression shifted to something approaching understanding. "Are you telling me that the wildlife recognized you as something that was choosing not to be dangerous, rather than something that was incapable of being dangerous?" "I think they recognized that I was exactly as dangerous as I needed to be, ma'am. No more, no less." The Admiral was quiet for a long moment. "Cadet Chen, I'm going to ask you a question, and I want you to answer honestly. In your opinion, how many humans like you are there?" Marcus thought about Earth's population, about the billions of people who had learned to navigate a world where every ecosystem was actively trying to kill them, where survival was a skill set passed down through generations, where the baseline for normal would be considered superhuman by galactic standards. "All of them, ma'am," he said simply. "That's just what humans are." Admiral Kesai left his quarters with a new understanding of why Earth had been quarantined, why the galactic community had been content to let humanity develop in isolation, and why the decision to finally extend Academy admission to Deathworld species might reshape everything they thought they knew about the nature of civilization itself. Marcus returned to his studies, his routine, and his carefully managed integration into Academy life. But word was beginning to spread throughout the galactic community that something fundamental had changed. The Deathworlders were no longer isolated on their impossible planets. They were here, among the civilized species, and they were exactly as capable as their homeworlds had made them. The galaxy was about to discover what happened when you gave average humans access to technology, training, and the vast canvas of interstellar space. Marcus Chen, average human from an average Deathworld, was simply the first glimpse of what was coming. And every creature with the sense to recognize an apex predator was already stepping aside to let them pass.